So let's now move on to the details part where we discuss the data requirements and business rules in SELA reporting. The following are the key data collected from the SELA file. First, the current English language acquisition status, or ELAS, of each student, if it hasn't been reported yet. Second, the student's primary language spoken at home based on the home language survey. Third is the ELAS status date. And lastly, the ELAS correction code, which is required when ELAS status progression does not follow the proper sequence. Let's now discuss the different SELA data elements in detail, starting with the ELAS codes. There are 6 possible ELAS codes to choose from. First is EO, or English only. This code is used when the only language reported in the home language survey form is English or American language. Next is the TBD, or to be determined. This is reported when the home language survey form indicates a foreign primary language. Only use a TBD if the student does not have any prior ELAS status reported, or if a student was incorrectly reported as EO and requires to take the initial LPAC testing. The next 2 statuses are based on a student's initial LPAC scores. An IFEP is reported if the student's scores meet the threshold to be considered proficient in English, while an EL, or English learner status, is reported if the initial LPAC assessment indicates a student lacks clearly defined English language skills necessary to succeed in the school's regular instructional program. Next is the RFEP status, which is the final status an EL must achieve. Once an EL student scores high enough on the LPAC summative test, he or she is then reclassified or redesignated as proficient in English. Otherwise, a student will remain an EL. And lastly is ADEL. This is used for KN to 12 students age 22 and older who was identified as speaking a foreign language through local processes but are not eligible to take the LPAC due to age restrictions. An EL student who age out or reaches 22 while still enrolled must have their SELA status updated within ADEL as well. So let's first tackle primary language. So the primary language is used to determine if a student needs to be LPAC tested or not. The primary language is determined through the home language survey or through other local processes that you might be employing at your LEA. A student's primary language should never change. Then if ever a student has indicated a sign language as a primary language, here are some guidance in terms of what language to report. There are times wherein there's a combination of sign language and other languages, and so here's some guidance for that. So if all responses on the HLS indicate American Sign Language as the primary language, then mark the language as 37. Now, if one of the questions indicate ASL, while another has a response of non-English, the primary language should be the non-English language indicated. Now, if the responses on the HLS has a sign language of ASL and then primary language of 99 or other non-English language, then the primary language is 99. In these 2 cases here, if it's not 37 for all 3 questions, then in these 2 cases, the student should still be tested for LPAC. Next is the ELAS status start date. For TBD status, the date should be a current date and within this current academic year. It can also be a date prior to the student's enrollment start date in CalPADS, meaning a student can have a future enrollment start date as long as it's between July 1st and September 1st of the current academic year. For EO status, the status date may be equal to or after the reported student enrollment start date in CalPADS. For ADEL status, the status date may be equal to or after the reported student's enrollment start date in CalPADS and 22nd birthday. For IFEP and EL status, the date may be equal to or after the reported student enrollment start date in CalPADS. It is important to note that TOMS will automatically push EL and IFEP dates once the initial LPAC is completed. However, if an LEA decides to report the ELA status in CalPADS manually through online maintenance, it should be the test completion date. For RFEP status, this should be the date that is equal to or after the reported student enrollment start date and reflects the summative test completion date. So when do you report ELA statuses in CalPADS? There are three conditions as to when you report these statuses in CalPADS. First is if the student is brand new in California, has no SSIDs yet, or has just been issued an SSID, has no ELAS records in CalPADS, and is in grade KN to 12. And then, of course, if the student has been reported as TBD for more than 90 days, you are required to update the student's ELAS status in CalPADS. Third is if the student has a valid change in status. So if a student was initially tested and now is determined as EL, or if the student has taken the summative test and is now RFEP, then you report those statuses in CalPADS. So you don't just report, when you submit a SELA file, you don't include all of your students' SELA records every time you upload a file. You only extract the statuses of the students who needs to be updated in CalPADS.